City is a word used to describe almost anything. A tiny settlement in the Midwest with fewer than 10,000 people and nothing more than a sheriff to represent civic authority is called a city. So is Tokyo, with a population approaching 40 million, an urban structure based on multiple electoral districts, a parliamentary chamber, a governor, a prefectural government employing 250,000 people, and a multi-billion-dollar budget. If anywhere can be defined as a city, then the definition runs the risk of meaning nothing. A city is made by its people, within the bounds of the possibilities that it can offer them. It has a distinctive identity that makes it much more than an agglomeration of buildings. Climate, topography, and architecture are part of what creates that distinctiveness, as are its origins. Cities based on trade have qualities different from those that were called into being by manufacturing. Some cities are built by autocrats, others have been shaped by religion. Some cities have their origins in military strategy or statecraft. These are not generic elements that always produce the same outcomes. In material terms, a city can be defined by how close together its people gather to live and work, by its systems of government, by its transport infrastructure, and by the functioning of its sewers, and, not least, by its economic potential. The idea of what makes a city is most elusive. One definition of a city is that it is a wealth-creating machine that can, at the minimum, make the poor not quite as poor as they were. A real city offers its citizens the freedom to be what they want to be.
Great quote, Aaron.
Yeah, it's a quote from a book called The Language of Cities by Dejan Sujic, which I read a couple years ago, and I really liked it. It basically talked about what makes a city and going through different examples, historical and contemporary, how to improve them, basically.
Amazing.
And that's obviously relevant for today's episode, which is kind of our most conceptual in this series, this ongoing series in which we are planning our hypothetical, ideal, utopian city. And in this episode, we've already covered buildings, and we've covered kind of some of the services like waste and energy production. And here we're talking more abstractly about the democracy, the civics. What else? How else can we describe it?
Basically, the theories that will be governing our ideal city.
Yeah.
And because we live in a very diverse world where no two cities would ever be alike in the religion that's practiced, in the economic philosophy that is believed, we've been trying to find some
unifying principles.
Exactly. Very well put in.
Thank you. I have a bit of a way with words, but also, this is going to be a really hot recording session. So if I sound sweaty, just, try and ignore it.
Yeah, it's about 30 degrees today, and we can't have any fans on, obviously, because you'd be able to hear them.
Yeah.
So, watch that space. What did it say at the end of that quote? It was something about the city's purpose is to...
Oh, it said one purpose of a city can be just to make the poor people less poor.
Okay.
Is that what you meant?
Yeah, it was around there, something like that.
Or to help people realize what they can be or what they want to be?
Yeah, that's what it was. As I was doing research for this episode, that was one very prevalent concept, was that the purpose of the city or the governance of an area is to help the individual develop their potential.
Yeah.
Which I've never thought about before, that was like the role of a city.
Yeah.
Or like the role of like a community is to like develop the individuals while also uniting them.
I think that might be a North American thing in you and me, because we have our concept of the individual and a concept of the community, and they're just completely divorced for the most part. And we never really think about the growth of one helping the growth of the other.
But that just is how community is meant to work. But I just didn't even think of it. And as you said, it might be a Western condition.
It's also why our communities tend to either break down or I think not exist.
Yeah. Good point. So to start us off, I want to introduce a concept which I've recently been researching. So we talk a lot about degrowth on the podcast, which is essentially the sustainability philosophy of trying to reduce the dependence on really large corporations or reduce even just the existence of these.
Yeah, make the world more local, right?
Yeah, make things more local. But the thing about a degrown society is that there's never too much talk about what the government structure would look like. But I found this manifesto on what's called convivialism, or conviviality, and it's essentially trying to find a common thread throughout all different dogma and different political structures that exist in the world to find a unifying set of ideas.
Okay.
and to keep people focused on the environment first and foremost, as well as well-being of citizens also first and foremost. So those two things obviously are very closely related. So keep the focus on those, and keep the focus on growing the individual without fighting. So it's just a very peaceful idea, and it breaks down governance into, it says that good politics is politics based on dignity. So it doesn't say that there can't be a government in a degrown society, but it just needs to be really focused on...
Good politics is politics based on dignity.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that goes without saying, but in real life it doesn't go without saying. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. It also talks a bit about how, because my thought whenever I think about a degrown world, I don't see it as like not a democracy and not a capitalist society. I see it as both of those things, but I wanted to look into why they've failed so much and why they've led us to this really sucky situation with the environment.
Environmentally? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And basically what this article that I was reading on conviviality said was that, sorry, I'm just going on a tangent.
No, go for it.
Was that modern capitalism they referred to it as fossil capitalism. So it's just entirely built around fossil fuel extraction, and a lot of attempts to stop that are taxing, like putting a tax on carbon or something. And what it said in this article I was reading is that that's not going to happen. Like, the fossil fuel companies are going to fight against it and try and sway the government, which they've obviously succeeded in the last 50 years, to not actually tax it or not enforce it.
Okay.
And what conviviality is saying is we need to stick to our morals, whatever they are, no matter where you are, what your worldview is. You need to stick to your morals and not let them be swayed. And that's what, like, a true democracy wouldn't be so... Like, we're not living in a true democracy. We're living in this really, like, authoritarian world where the authority is fossil fuel companies.
Yeah, among other lobbyists.
Yeah.
For sure. We've been talking about politics a little bit recently.
Yeah.
And following the happenings of the 2020 US election from afar, just been kind of lamenting the absolute lack of politicians with integrity, which it seems like what you just described can be that's what it can be reduced to.
Yeah.
It's like those with authority are corrupt, or rather the authority corrupts. And in the modern age, it corrupts towards fossil fuel companies because that's who has the money and the influence.
Yeah, exactly. So just being more full of integrity if you're governing people. So,
Yeah,
like, in our ideal city, the politicians would be completely separate from fossil fuel companies. Ideally, the fossil fuel companies, those are probably some that just we would want to not exist anymore. And another thing that I was reading a bit about is that you can't just try and shut down, like, the fossil fuel companies. You have to shut down, like, the little things, shift people more towards electric cars or shift people more towards public transit.
Yeah, make the change from the ground up, you mean?
Yeah.
Degrowth is all about that. I kind of think it has to be less a ground up or a top down and more of a pinch from both ends.
Yeah, you're right.
You need both sides working at it, both the people and the government. Ideally, the government would be actually a simple reflection of the people, but that isn't happening. And I think that's kind of the crux of the issue, which we can talk about today.
Yeah.
If we're starting out with democracy as this is the gold standard for how cities, states, countries are run, just a pure democracy, then the question is, like, do we have pure democracy today in most countries? We don't think so. And the question is, like, why? What's the failing? How can we make the governance a better reflection of what the people actually want? Because otherwise it's just kind of tyrannical. So do you mind if that sounds like an interesting manifesto.
Yeah, it was very long and complex, and I tried my best to summarize it there, but I might encourage you just to go and read it. And even reading the introduction gives you a bit of an idea of what the whole thing's about.
Do you have any link or name or references?
It's just called, like, the Convivialism Manifesto. If you look that up, you'll get it.
Cool.
Yeah.
The text which I chose to kind of base my part of the discussion on was older, and it was Plato's Republic, just because when we said we were doing an Ideal City 3, I was like, awesome, I have an excuse to read this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's obviously one of the most famous artifacts or essays of philosophy ever written, and it kind of is a little bit more politics than it is philosophy, but kind of both. And it's basically him outlining his ideal state in terms of justice. How do we get the most justice out of things?
Mm-hmm.
How do we hold that up as the ideal, and how do we best embody that? And some of the tenets which he came up with on how to build this ideal utopia was that there would be 3 social classes. So there's the rulers, the military, and a productive class. So those are like merchants, farmers, artisans, regular people, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Plato also had some strange ideas about how these people were determined, and he thought it was like by the amount of precious metal that was in their hearts or that their body was composed of.
All right.
So whether it was like gold or silver or bronze or copper, like, but you know, it's 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
So kind of some slack. Another thing was that, which is maybe more relevant, was that everyone does one thing based on what they're best at.
Mm.
Yeah, which is an ultra collectivistic mindset.
Yeah.
You're forgoing kind of the individual for their place in as a cog in the wider social machine, which we've seen almost exactly that realized multiple times, I would say, over the last 100 years. And most people today would say that it's quite oppressive, that it's kind of wrong to do. Maybe we can discuss it. And another thing was that on the subject of governance, the rulers who he termed or who he characterized as philosopher kings would get paid just a small salary by the state, so they wouldn't be luxuriously rich like most big politicians that we see today. And some of the traits that characterize those are that they love wisdom, ideas, and it's the philosophers who rule. That was kind of that's the crux of it, because he thought they would have the best eye and the best vision for making decisions, basically. And they are in tune with the ideal world of forms. And Plato's idea of the ideal world of forms was basically it's kind of hard to understand exactly what he means, but there was this semi-corporeal, kind of physical, kind of imagined world of forms overlaid or running parallel to our world.
Okay.
So anything that you see, so I'm seeing like a bookshelf now, there's that, and it also has there's an ideal version of a bookshelf. Or a tree. There's the trees that we see, and then there's an ideal version of a tree. Or not just for physical things, but also for democracy. There's the democracy we see, and there's the ideal version of democracy.
Mm-hmm.
There's love, and then there's the ideal version of love. And there's beauty, which we see in the world, but there's also an ideal version of beauty.
Mm-hmm.
And the philosopher kings were people who were in tune with that, which means that they were best plugged into, and they had spent the most time contemplating the ideals, basically, which I thought was a really cool meta way of framing this episode and this series about the ideal version of a city.
Yeah, very well put. Because it's not like we're saying this is exactly how anything's going to run, but it's just in theory.
Yeah, the point is that we're not going to set out to build an ideal city, but you just pursue it and you get as close as you can. Mm-hmm. That's how you live life anyway.
Yeah,
you have to be aware of those ideals, like you have to contemplate them.
Yeah.
One takeaway that I got from reading The Republic was that the politicians, the philosopher kings, were politicians and philosopher kings. They were respected in that profession. They had trained, they were specialized. Whereas now I think, for instance, there's a lot of celebrities who people are like, yeah, that would be a good prime minister or a good president, which I was never a fan of. When it comes to politicians, I think having not been a politician is not a good thing.
No, I mean,
the experience.
That's the thing.
Takes skills.
Yeah, and I think modern politicians, maybe the reason that people are kind of against them being in power,
of course,
is because they're practiced in lying and
I know what
being
you mean.
corrupt. But in the ideal city, they would be educated on philosophy, on
economics.
Yeah.
People, they would know their constituents.
Mm-hmm.
They would know the history is another key thing.
Yeah.
Super well. We were talking about politics in over the last month, and we were both kind of in agreement. People making decisions, if I could choose one thing for them to be well educated on, it would be the history of the world. Pretty much any region, because history is the same wherever you go, it seems to me. It would just stop them from making so many mistakes. And that's how you gain wisdom, is kind of learning about the mistakes people have made.
When you said about the different classes of people that Plato was proposing, I thought a little bit about, in the ideal city, how would jobs work? Because I feel like it'd be less dependent on money, like it would be less driven by money, but maybe more driven on contributing to your society, which is kind of what it was getting at. We've seen how that doesn't work if people are just really forced into like one avenue. But I believe if we value artists and caregivers more, it would work.
Right.
And things were less, like the most important thing I believe would be having maybe a cap on income, but also like a floor. Like no one's living below.
Yeah, of course. Like a living wage, you mean?
Yeah, that just needs to exist.
Well, I'm not an economics expert, but it seems to me that one of the things which causes issues in terms of like the actual economics differing from what most people themselves would value is that we pay for goods and things, but we kind of undervalue what you described, art, caregiving. A good example I find is like maternity leave or in general parenting. People don't get paid for that, but it's work and it's ultimately the most kind of productive work for your town or for your city.
Yeah.
Because you are training a new member for it,
and
you're creating one. In those kind of discrepancies that the economy won't organically, that will just never happen, that parents will be paid for doing that because there's nobody to pay them. In those kind of discrepancies, that's when the government should step in. That's kind of my loose understanding of it. But yeah, the social classes, I wanted to ask, do you think that was just a Plato in ancient Greece thing, rulers, military, productive class? Or do you think there is a way to modernize that? Because I know a lot of people don't like capitalism because of vast inequality, but it's a simple fact that inequality will kind of exist in whatever economic system you're in. The top can be closer to the bottom. I think we all agree that should be the case.
Yeah.
So there's always going to be hierarchy.
Yeah.
The main thing about hierarchy is that you want to make sure it's not fixed. You want to make sure that people in the lower echelons can always work their way up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Some societies do that really well. Something like a feudalist society does that really poorly with a monarchy. There's no chance of anyone ever getting to the quote-unquote top. Yeah.
I think the division, because it's like the rulers aren't a monarchy. They aren't even necessarily politicians. They're thinkers and...
In Plato's... Well, another thing I wanted to mention, which I think I just conflated, was that he was very firm on divorcing wealth from power. So wealth was not a factor. That's why I mentioned that the rulers didn't get paid that much.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's the opposite. The wealthy run the world.
Exactly.
Essentially. So that's something that needs to change. It's like we need to value wisdom as the decision makers. The wealthy can line their pockets elsewhere. In any society they will.
Yeah.
But it's about just keeping them away from corrupting governance.
Yeah. Because it's like the capitalism that we're experiencing right now has stopped valuing community. And that kind of is in line with the like tragedy of the commons, that it's just like if everyone has access to this one field, everyone will like take the most for themselves. And whenever I heard that theory, I was like, no, that's not true, because people are people and like they'll think about their neighbor. But there's like a split, and like now there's just a monopolization of property and like the means of production, I guess.
Yeah.
But I think in a perfect society, the means of production can still be private. Like I don't think we need to be communist.
It's just that the democracy should be outside that.
Yeah.
Like Jeff
just
Bezos
separate.
Should have no more of a vote than we should, is essentially what we're saying.
It just feels sometimes like democracy and capitalism are like inseparable in this place. In the West, or in whatever, in the global North, maybe. Maybe that's just the countries we've experienced. Maybe we're painting too broad a brush. Maybe it's because the US dominates the news so much. True.
And, the countries which dominate the news, I find, are mostly oligarchies. So I think that's what we're mostly talking about. But I just wanted to mention the Republic mainly for that idea of the ideal world of forms, because I thought it was a really cool framing for the discussion to come, and the discussion that has come. Because we've talked about the ethics of us, like, planning out this city meticulously.
Yeah.
But the key point is that it is a hypothetical. It is an ideal. Like it's not a blueprint.
Yeah.
It's just something to strive for.
Exactly.
Because I wanted to make this distinction when it comes to artificial cities like Dubai versus historical cities like most of those in Europe. Dubai is kind of like ultimately planned out, and everything about it is, the buildings to the social structure is all like created. It didn't come from anything.
Yeah.
Even like those islands which they make.
Yeah, and this ideal city might seem like we're trying to do that. It's just like create something out of nothing. But we're trying to like kind of retrofit, I guess, existing structures and say, okay, you have your culture, history, religion. Just try and steer it towards a more environmental, dignified, well-being focus.
And ground that focus in historical lessons as much as we possibly can.
Yeah.
As well as those of sustainability. I think an even clearer ideal example of this artificial notion of city building, which is in itself tyrannical, no matter how well-intentioned you are. That's why I wanted to make the point. If we somehow stumbled into a lot of money and power and bought a bunch of land and said we're going to build this city, like that's wrong. That's tyrannical. That I don't think works. But something I wanted to mention was Disney World, because its original idea, or one of its early drafts, was as an actual town/city.
Yeah.
I think I have the timeline a little bit muddled, but I think Disneyland existed as in a Disney-themed amusement park, kind of a small one.
Okay.
And then Walt Disney was kind of worried about the state of cities in America and how things were going, and especially sanitation, cleanliness, all those kind of things. And so he said, I'm going to make what's called a company town, so to be Disney funded and Disney themed and everything, which has been termed an Epcot, experimental prototype community of tomorrow. And this is around the time in the 50s and 60s where there's all those like Tomorrowland. Like that was part of the concept. And the purpose of Disney World was to be a city that would never cease to be a blueprint of the future, designed to draw upon the latest technology from American industry. Planned to be a company town, and he had designs and mock-ups and sketches and animations, and it had like a radial design with monorails going back and forth, and a huge hotel and industrial town complex in the middle, housing. Everything was all planned out like that. And Disney were contacting industrial leaders around the country asking for their expertise, help, money, and production to do various things in the town, which is kind of reminiscent of things that we say, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I think like the key thing is that we say this is a good idea to do in existing towns that aren't funded by large corporations entirely.
Yeah, more driven by the people, driven by a desire to...
Yeah, rather than one kind of well-intentioned millionaire or billionaire.
Yeah.
Supposedly well-intentioned.
What about like environmental policy as the foundation for all communities? Do you think that would work if that was just like a universal... I mean, it would work, but I think just in the ideal city, the environment would be at the forefront of things.
So we will talk about the nature in the town, but I'm guessing that's not what you mean.
I think if those kinds of cities were being built, so like if this ideal like Walt Disney city was being built, or if every government in the world started saying every time they made a decision, is this the most environmental, it would just fix everything. Because I feel like it would fix the industries, it would fix the challenges that were facing people in terms of like sanitation, in terms of like disputes among people, and I think just asking yourself that before you make any decision would be a way to kind of like retrofit existing governments.
Yeah.
To be better for people and the environment.
Yeah, that's like utilitarianism is anytime you make a decision, you have to weigh it to see, is this the best for people? And you're talking about like an environmental utilitarianism. Yeah. I guess that's what most green parties want to do.
Yeah.
And it's close to most people's ethics. I think the environment is genuinely up there in terms of priorities, but the things above it will never be moved. It's like, what if the most environmental decision is not the one that saves the most lives, or not the one that brings most people out of poverty? Like that's the sticking point.
I know, but I just think in the long run it would be the best for the most people.
It wouldn't. It definitely would in the long run. That's the whole point of sustainability. It it's not just environmental sustainability, but it will literally save the most lives and bring the most people out of poverty. But in the short term, people just want economic prosperity and they want it now.
Yeah.
You know, it's hard for people to think about the generations to come.
I know. But like there's literally is no link between economic prosperity and well-being.
You mean unhappiness?
No, like well-being is measured, it's like health, life expectancy, happiness. Like I'm pretty sure there's no proven link between the two. Because it causes a lot of like excess mental health issues.
Really?
Like they balance out. I was looking into it and that's like it was
that's
proven.
Shocking to me. I'm guessing like at a certain point. So you mean maybe like once you cross a certain amount of income? Because if you're in abject poverty, you won't live very long. But you mean in terms of like first world countries maybe.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
Yeah, like economic prosperity is like a certain threshold. I'm not talking about just like making a living wage, because there is obviously a link between well-being and that. But people need to just be educated on the fact that having more money or having more just does not mean you're going to live a better life.
No.
And yeah, I found another cool stat, which I just didn't realize. And it said if everyone was living the lifestyle of someone in an affluent country in the 70s, like everyone in the world, all like how many billion people are there? 8 billion people, things would be fine.
Of like the US in the 70s?
Mm-hmm.
So things have skyrocketed that much since then? Wow.
Yeah.
Does that include like the industrial happenings of the 70s though?
No, it said using modern technology and modern efficiency, environmental.
Okay.
But it's like it was basically saying we could be consuming as much, having the same size houses.
Wow.
But just using modern technology and modern efficiency, yeah.
That's
which
crazy.
is just like way less daunting than the sacrifices I expected people in the West would have to make for people in developing countries to improve their quality of life.
Yeah, and for us to maintain it as well.
Yeah.
Like, regardless of developing countries, you can't keep, emitting at the same rate.
Yeah, exactly. And it says, like, the West will have to, like, cut back to the 70s lifestyles, but then it will allow everyone else to, like, come up to that, which is...
You know what that means?
Kind of cool.
Disco's coming back.
Disco's back, baby. I said that to the girls at work today, and they were just like, oh, cool. But then,
you said disco's coming back?
No, I said, like, we're going back to the 70s, and they were like, yeah, cool. Like... I was like, yeah. I mean, like, we don't have to, disco doesn't actually have to come back. But
you were really excited. You were like, guys, we don't have to, it's just the 70s. Like, we don't have to go back that much further.
That was literally me
And they were like, what? You're like, it's the 70s.
Like, no, I thought we were
started writing it on the wall.
That was literally my, like, reaction when I read that stat. I was like,
back.
It's like, no, like, we don't have to go back to, like, the 1400s. Like, we don't have to live in caves. Like, we can have houses.
Was that the 1400s or was that, like, the Stone Age?
Yeah, I was really excited and I said something dumb. I was like, I thought we were gonna have to be like getting our water out of wells. But I meant like going up to like the town well and like getting a bucket.
Yeah, I mean, that would still be kind of cool though.
No, I know.
Okay, next thing.
Mm-hmm.
Just talking governance. This is something I've been kind of thinking over the last little bit, and I believe it more the more news that I watch.
Mm.
Most countries are just too big and too populated. There is such an extreme, and it's something about that urban-rural divide as well.
Mm.
It's such an extreme diversity of opinion and culture that it does not make sense for them all to be under the same government.
Yeah.
And in most cases, I would even argue, it's not fair for the side who's, or for the people whose views don't align at all with their governance.
Yeah, because I can't imagine being American.
I mean, that's the whole point of democracy. Like, some people lose or whatever. Some people are in the minority views. It's not just America, it's Canada as well.
No,
it's a lot of these huge countries that have 50 plus million people. It's like, that's always been the case that there's some minority percentage of people whose views aren't represented in government.
Mm-hmm.
But now that minority percentage of people is like...
49%.
Well, it could be not even the percent. I'm talking that, like, the actual number is millions and millions of people. So it just doesn't really make sense. And when you have let's say America, you have an east and a west coast, like it's pretty much the width of a continent.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what do these people have in common? Why are they, how is that one country? How is that? So I think and not just the bad things about big countries and where I think big government is kind of necessary, but the good things about small countries is that maybe you might know the president.
True.
Or, a more localized power. So even if it's a huge country, more power being to the states or the towns.
Yeah.
That just seems to me like it would work better. You would know people better, and also it would really energize people more and make them less disenfranchised when it comes to local politics.
Yeah.
Which I think should be more important than
National politics. Yeah.
I mean, I know there's like national policy is a huge thing. We saw there have been world wars. That's kind of maybe made the shift to federal politics being so much more important. But the fact that like no one here knows or cares about their local mayor,
yeah,
myself included. Like anytime there's a local election, I'm just like, I don't care.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't really matter.
Like they don't do much.
Because they don't have much power.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely think that in our ideal city or city-state, it doesn't really matter if it's a state-size country or a state which has its own kind of autonomy and power within a larger country. That would just help people be more active and involved citizens.
Yeah, because even if your mayor, like, it was a 70-30 vote for him, and then those 30 people, saying it's a town of 100 people,
yeah,
those 30 people were like, that's not the person I wanted. But then the mayor could, like, work with those people.
I mean, that's the whole point of democracy.
Exactly.
Is that this it's so, and systems like America, and I'm going to keep saying it, I really think the size of America leads to this, and obviously the America's history, we can't ignore that it was never just one block. There were always separations, but it leads to this extreme partisan behavior where no one crosses the aisle to talk to the other person.
Yeah.
But I just think if that were the same system, but even in a town, you'd be forced to.
Yeah.
Like you'd have to. And also the internet obviously makes it so that you, which I said last week, are kind of existing in a different nation to your neighbor anyway.
Yeah. Cool.
But yeah, country's too big. I believe this.
Mayors and provincial MPs used to have a lot of power, but then I think following World War II, it was like, no, we need to have centralized government. Yeah. And I think there needs to be a degree of unity across the nation. Like, if the States doesn't break up, or if Canada doesn't break up, then there needs to be like an overarching, like, these are the rules for everybody, but they should just be agreed upon, decided from, like, extracting the best and the common thread throughout all of the states, and those don't change. Like, I guess it would be like, what's it called? The Constitution. But if the Constitution was better.
The Constitution. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, if the Constitution was actually abided by and made better.
Well, the problem is, it's only, you say better, but it would be better for some of the people. A big portion of people would be significantly against whatever changes you want to make to it.
But
whatever
just, like,
amendment.
If it's about the environment or like access to water.
Like a big percentage of people who like don't agree with the environment being a priority or whatever.
Well,
let them be their own country. No, because then they emit.
Yeah, I think people are gonna have to people who are against water and the environment just need to suck it up, and probably within their lifetimes they'll be able to see, oh, I was wrong. People are in better health.
Going back to Disney World and that Epcot, experimental prototype community of tomorrow, which just sounds so like Walt Disney.
I love it.
But it sounds like something that would come up in a Dr. Seuss movie.
Yeah.
The experimental prototype community of tomorrow. And at the end it would be the guy in a suit who's like proposing it on one of those boards in a boardroom. He would like fall in mud. Yeah. And the kind of organic town would be cheering. Or something. I don't know, because he tried to level their town to build a new one, which was really kind of soulless and concrete, and they were like, no, and the town all had to rally behind. Despite their differences, their internal differences, the town had to like rally together and push him away and avoid his tempting financial advances. But yeah, along that line of the Epcot, I want to talk about the Amazon current like headquarters, and also seen, I think, with companies like Apple.
Google has one.
Google has one.
Yep.
Just like these huge campuses, headquarters, company towns, whatever you want to call them, where people live on site. That's weird.
Yeah. Like when I first learned about that in my management classes, because obviously management's all about like this is so cool and so productive.
Really? They were saying that was cool?
Yeah.
Sounds dystopian.
And like
to
this
me.
sounds scary. And there's like Apple buses that like transport say people from like downtown New York to their campus, and like when people were protesting Apple, they were like attacking the buses. And it's like that sounds so dystopian. Is like the what would it be in Divergent? Like the insurgent people get on the bus, they take the bus out to meet the other people, and
what's most annoying to me is that it's not in itself doesn't sound terrible. It's kind of like this uncanny valley where it's close to what I think would be almost ideal. A campus-like feel. You said buses taking people around. Yeah. They probably have a cafeteria. Sounds a little bit communist-y. Or like a convent, something like that. But I don't like...
It's close.
What I don't like is the Apple branding on everything. What I don't like is that this whole thing...
was manufactured
and is for a company.
Yeah.
You know, that's the biggest issue.
It should be for the people. That's it.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that because it struck me when I was thinking about Disney World. It's like, whoa, we have those. We have pretty much his vision.
Yeah, we literally do. It's kind of crazy.
And
they have their own gyms.
Turned into an amusement park, which is like a destination for every family in the world.
Yeah.
Okay, the next thing that I wanted to mention was this idea of our individualism, our extreme individualism in the Americas, I will say, compared to lesser developed countries having what seems to me from the outside, again, I'm not very well researched, but I think it is the case that is in a lot of developing countries, not to treat them as a homogenous mass, there is more of an emphasis on the community or the tribe or one's neighbors, rather than it being such an individualized economic free-for-all, even if they're in capitalism. So that's something that I want to think about with regards to our ideal city and our democracy, I think, because there are tons of systems which we probably don't even realize only exist in our part of the world because of our extreme individualization. One thing that I thought of, didn't think it through all the way, but which struck me was insurance. It's like, I think if it was kind of more of a collectivist mindset, everyone would pitch in if your car crashed or something. You know, that would be the safety net, basically.
I thought your community would rally together if your car broke down and give you $20 to fix it, or just fix it for you if they were a mechanic.
Yeah.
Very, very good.
Well, there are also some examples of, in other countries or in other cultures, childcare, raising your children. There are multiple people in the neighborhood who are kind of like family members, even if they're not, and the kids just kind of like go between houses. Like they still have their parents, so they still have like a house and a primary home where they spend a lot of their time, but there's much more laxity, and they're just kind of, they know more people basically from a more intimate level.
It's more trust.
Yeah, trust, I think, is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah, trust and just like mutualism.
Yeah, and that's something that I don't think is inherently
anti-capitalist.
Yeah, well, I don't think we are inherently, have always been the opposite of. I think the West has always been individualistic, is kind of what characterizes it a little bit. But when you hear, that's not so different from when you hear our parents complaining about, hey, when I was a kid, I used to be able to go out on the streets and roam around and go to my friends' houses until the sunset. Yeah. And that's what pretty much every parent says. It's like, but now, and I love the word you chose, trust, there's no trust anymore, and like, we don't know our neighbors anymore, so that doesn't happen anymore. Yeah,
wouldn't even trust my kid to like walk home in the dark.
No way.
No, there's literally no way.
If it was like, hey, I'm going to stay with this parent, or with this, I'm going to stay over with this kid, you'd be like, I need to meet them. I need to know, I need to see. So it's something about trust, it's something about the internet exposing us maybe to more of the evils of the world. Yeah. So now everyone's way more suspicious, everyone's kind of way more on edge. But it's it's resulted in this extreme individualization where most kids live at home and that's it. It's also maybe even just a simple thing with the physical structure of the communities. Most kids in America can't just walk around to their friend's house.
True.
Houses.
Yeah, and there's not even buses in a lot of places.
Yeah, so that's something I wanted to mention, just this tribe mentality. I think it could be fostered here in cool ways.
I think so.
And even you said about sustainability bringing people together. Even something like a community, an apartment block, a street, garden. Mm-hmm. Those things do that. Yeah. So those kind of initiatives, I think, would be all over this ideal city.
For sure. And I just love, I'm not going to get off the idea of like the joint insurance concept or like the joint.
Yeah, well, actually I got that from Kanye. He was talking about when he went to Africa, that the way he worded it was that there should be more people starving, but people don't let other people starve. Yeah. You know what? That sounds so bad. But you know what I mean?
No, I know.
That people have each other's backs, and people don't really do that here at all.
No.
I feel like it's kind of this this heaven-hell analogy, where it's like heaven and hell it's the same table with the same amount of food, but all everyone has to eat with is really long forks. So in the West, it's like, or in an individualistic society rather, people are trying to eat with these really long forks, but they can't physically raise them to their mouths. Yeah. But in a more kind of communal, mutualistic society, you use the long forks to feed each other. Yeah. So it's the same amount of food and the same utensils, but it's how you use them. Yeah. That might sound analogy. Silly. I don't know.
Did you just come up with that?
No. Of course not. That's famous.
Okay, not famous enough to have reached
I wish I'd just come up with that. No, it's really famous.
Cool.
And the last thing that I wanted to mention, kind of similar to the countries being too big, countries being too small, was the idea of patriotism, or pride, or town pride, or community pride, and even more fundamental than that, identity. Yeah. What makes this city a city? This one that we're talking about, this ideal city. And some examples I had were, obviously you've got the kind of symbolism of flags, or a national anthem, which most countries have today. Mm-hmm. Everyone has different ideas for kind of what binds a city, and the book that I was reading from at the start is a great source of discussion on that. So I firmly recommend it. I note that most European states have been bound by their heritage, so that's why they have more history, and that's kind of what forms the boundary, the borders, and the countries. Is either a cultural or an ethnic heritage in Europe for the most part. And now we start to see that this is kind of breaking down with globalization, and that's kind of leading to what I would characterize as like a mass identity crisis in Europe. That seems to be the root of a lot of their politics right now. Yeah. And kind of the thing that stands out to me is America, because it wasn't founded on any heritage, cultural or ethnic. They were bound and united United States on values. So not their heritage, but the ideas of freedom, liberty, and justice. Those is supposedly, you can talk about whatever America is today, but that's a very noble concept. That no, it doesn't matter what we look like or even our history together. If you agree with these values, you're welcome. I think that's what would bind our city. That would be the foundation, right? Yeah, it would just be a set of ideals. You can legitimize your belief in those ideals from whatever experiences you've had, whatever your religious beliefs are. Well said. Yeah. But yeah, so that's kind of the identity. You can still brand it with flags. That's basically what flags are, right? It's a symbol for. That's why people cry. It's a symbol for when freedom. They look at a flag. Yeah. It's like, oh, this is freedom waving in the wind. Yeah. Or and that's why I think, hot take, but the American flag and that kind of patriotism is a little bit more understandable to me than most other countries, because most other countries, again, it's just history, which is pretty much happenstance. It's just like you happen to share the same heritage. Yeah. In America, if you buy into it, then it's like you're buying into a shared contract of ideals with your people around you. Mm-hmm. That seems to me like the only sustainable form of quote-unquote patriotism. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to talk about first, what's your experience with patriotism? Born and raised in Canada. Yeah. I'm proud of my country, but it's because I just
haven't had a choice, I don't feel super patriotic.
Right.
But I feel like in the ideal city, you would have a choice. Like, it would just be really easy to move between countries or between cities.
Okay.
And then I feel like I'd feel more patriotism, even if I, like, had the choice to, like, stay here. But, like, I don't really, like, you know what I mean? Then I might be more patriotic if I was like, this is my home. But I haven't chosen my home yet, so I don't feel too much patriotism. But I do see a lot of people who, when you talk about global politics, they're like, I'm so proud to be Canadian because we have values of, like, socialist values, I guess, of, like, healthcare for all, we have free education and stuff like that.
For me, it's the wording of it. I mean, I was not born in Canada, I was born in England, and I moved here when I was 8, which is not a good time to foster any kind of patriotism for either country. I remember once we were staying with your friends, and they were like, so do you feel more English or more Canadian? And I was like, neither. And that's how I feel.
Yeah.
That was just a function, I think, of my own personality as well. But I would never use the words proud of the country. I would say grateful. For me, and those are kind of opposites.
Yeah.
Pride is kind of like me taking responsibility for it. Maybe it's because I'm young and haven't been a part of the workforce or anything. Or maybe it's because I'm just been kind of divorced from any kind of social activism. But people talk about it even with things before they were born. It's like, oh, I'm proud of that. I'm like, do you mean grateful?
Probably mean grateful.
I think it's a really important distinction to make.
Yeah.
But even on smaller scales, we're both university students.
Yeah.
But we don't wave flags or wear the merch particularly proudly.
True.
You know, I've never...
It is more a sense of gratefulness.
Yeah. I've never felt that. And I wonder if that's in me like a manifestation of a modern... I wonder if that's a modern trait, that less people are being patriotic. I remember seeing footage of Angela Merkel, Germany's chancellor, a couple of years ago, and she was doing a photo shoot or a interview or something, and someone tried to like come in with a German flag and start waving it. She was like, get that out of here, and she kind of batted him away. I wonder if that's a modern thing. It's like less of this tribalism.
Yeah.
But okay, the question I think I wanted to get at was, patriotism is kind of conflated with nationalism a lot these days, and demonized, I would say, as this kind of tribalistic xenophobia or...
Yeah, like us against you or whatever.
Yeah, an us against the world mentality. I wanted to ask, is there any kind of good patriotism? And obviously, is it present in this ideal town?
I think there is a type of good patriotism. We'd have to find a new name for it, but it would just be...
Well, it would be patriotism, which is a positive thing.
Yeah, but it would be transformed into a gratefulness for the society you live in and a desire to give your all to making the society a better place.
Yeah. I guess those are probably the two parts of patriotism: gratefulness and identifying. And I suppose 3 parts: involving yourself.
Yeah, involvement
that
is a big
seems key. And I think that would probably be the biggest source of my own kind of lack of it, is that I'm not involved.
Yeah.
Mostly because I'm young and a little bit of my personality and, you know, the modern thing about escaping to the internet or something. But I think that's why most young people today would say they're not ultra patriotic. You know, they might be grateful and they might even identify with their country, with the values which we already mentioned. But if they're not involved, then there's no chance to really, firstly, see it firsthand, the things which they're supposed to be patriotic about, and also to contribute to it.
Yeah.
So yeah, we could be fostering that in our ideal town, because it's not a bad thing.
No, nationalism's a bad thing.
So that's all I had for today. Did you have anything else to mention?
I can mention the article that I got a lot of my thoughts from, besides the manifesto, was an article from the Degrowth magazine, and it was by Julia Steinberger, who is just a degrowth writer.
Okay.
So check that out. It's called Climate Breakdown, Capitalism and Democracy, and it asks the question, is preventing climate breakdown or just like climate change compatible with capitalism and democracy?
That sounds really awesome.
Yeah. It's very short, simple.
Because a lot of the more sustainable countries we see right now are maybe not the most democratic.
No.
So those things don't always go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. But my inkling would be that for it to be ultimately sustainable, you know, in the long run, they would have to go hand in hand.
I think so.
I think that was a cool episode.
Me too.
I think we backed up the things that we mentioned in the first 2 episodes with concepts pretty well.
Yeah.
We kind of brought the people to the infrastructure, which we've already outlined.
True, because we haven't really talked about the people, and next week we're going to be talking a lot about the people.
Next week we're going to be wrapping up this series with a talk about some more about the people, some more about the road system, some more about the nature, some more about the aesthetics of the city. Just coming into my mind right now, we have to mention that the city has to have a fountain.
It does have to have
a big fountain.
Maybe outside the bathhouse.
No. Maybe outside the town hall, no?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess.
So
the town hall was going to be a bathhouse.
So
right?
Look forward to that next week, episode Fountain. You can find us on Instagram at @the_environmental, where we post cool behind-the-scenes shots from our lives and some more episode-related.
Our thoughts on the episodes and our inspirations for the episodes, maybe, too.
Especially because oftentimes we listen back to these and realize, shoot, I forgot to say this really important thing.
Yeah.
So if there was anything which you heard us say today and thought, I wish they'd elucidated on that more, or I wish they'd clarified themselves on that more, you might be in luck, because we might do so on our Instagram page. So check that out. And on that note, I hope you all have a great
day.